Hi, I'm Anika She, and she talks crime.
Hello?
I know it's been a minute. You don't even have to say it. If you're watching the YouTube version of this podcast, you'd see I still have up literal Valentine's Day decor. I have been trying to film this podcast for weeks, and every time I would sit down and try to dedicate the time, I just couldn't, and I don't know why. For a while, I was a bit overwhelmed, but I'm happy to announce that we have a new researcher named Emily, and without her, I don't think I'd be able to continue this series. I really appreciate all you guys for still tuning in and checking up for when's the next episode's coming out. But to remain consistent and uphold the quality of this content, I'll be putting out a new episode every 2 weeks now. Thank you guys for being patient and understanding. Now let's get into the case. For a lot of people, what they can't relate to, they will never understand. People always ask why people commit nonviolent crimes such as robbery, theft, burglary, fraud, and so on. They wonder, why would you ever take something that isn't yours? How could you steal from someone? And those people that wonder that have probably never been in the position to need something that can mean the difference between life or death, homelessness and shelter, or starvation and a full belly. But this desperation, these reasons for stealing, they don't make it right. It just gives a reason. Now, not everyone who steals does so for survival, but everyone who steals does so for a need. Whether it's a need to feel in control, a need for attention, addiction, vindication, whatever it is. And for this imaginary scenario, I want you to pick a need, a reason to steal. I want you to imagine yourself stealing somebody's wallet. You're in a public building and you rip the wallet right out of their hands. Dozens of people saw the crime and are watching as the victim chases you as you try to flee. You run to the nearest, quickest exit you can find, an elevator. And as the doors to the elevator close, your escape is seconds away. The victim gets caught in the doors. The doors are crushing them slowly and refuse to open, despite their attempts. With the wallet filled with thousands in your hands, you have two options. You can take the safety exit and get away with the money and leave the victim to die, or you can press the open door button from inside the elevator, save the victim, and get caught for the crime. The real question is, how wrong is too wrong for you? You're already stealing. Is it too big of a leap to kill? On March 21st, 2022, four teenagers carjacked a 73-year-old woman named Linda Freaky. Their goal was to just steal the car, but it ended up with Linda's arms severed off and her lying naked and deceased in the middle of the road. Let's get into the case. Linda Freaky was born on November 22nd, 1948, making her a Scorpio. She was surrounded by love from her big Cajun family. Cajun like Louisiana Cajun, so yeah. And like many other Cajun families, she was very close to hers. She was married to her husband, Ricky Freaky, for 36 years. They had two children, four grandchildren, and a host of nieces and nephews. Linda loved her family and loved spending time with them, so much that she had weekly sister meetings that they would call the hen party. And honestly, that is so relatable. I feel like as you get older, your sense of community and family just grows stronger, and that's with whoever you consider to be family. It's not just limited to blood. Me and my sisters, we always joke about needing our wings and wine time, which is our version of the hen party. And if they were as close as me and my sisters are, I can understand how truly devastating this case is. Linda lived a full life. She was an agent for Security Plan Life Insurance for almost 30 years, and she became friends with many of the families that she helped and worked with. And that is a testament to how friendly and approachable she was because have y'all ever dealt with an insurance agent before? I know that when mine starts calling, I pretend like I don't see it. So for her to have genuine, long-lasting relationships with her clients, it's honestly amazing. She was also a fully licensed cosmetologist, but she only really practiced and worked with her friends and family. Now, I told you that Linda was 73 years old. She was getting up there in age, and her husband Ricky were excitedly planning her retirement in November of that year. But Linda was killed 8 months before she would ever retire. On a regular day like any other, Linda had just left work. She was possibly running some errands or getting some tasks completed before she went home, but as she was loading something into her gray 2021 Nissan Kicks sitting in front of a business, four teenagers approached her vehicle. In this group of teenagers, there are three girls: Brenia Baker, Lenraya Theophile, and Markel Curtis, and one boy named John Honore. They were all under the age of 18 at the time. Now, John opens the driver's side door where Linda is and immediately ambushes her by spraying pepper spray directly into her face, while on the passenger side of the car, one of the three girls, I'm not sure which one, is beating Linda up inside the car. The remaining two girls watch cautiously as they enter the back seat of the car. Now, the point of a carjacking is to steal the car, and you can't really do that if the owner is still inside of it. It's not enough for them to attack her, they have to remove her from the vehicle. And John Honore does just that as he begins to forcibly drag Linda out of her own car, which is interesting to me because I feel like all the depictions in media of carjackings that I've seen, they usually start and end with a threat. Whether it's with a gun or some sort of weapon, the perpetrator usually just threatens to harm the owner of the car, and that's typically enough for them to give it up. I feel like most carjackings, again, that are depicted on media, they aren't super violent. Most people value their own life over their car. It's just interesting to me that they never even gave Linda the chance to voluntarily give her car up. But this is where it takes a turn for the worse. As John is trying to shove her out of her car, he began kicking and stomping on her head, presumably out of frustration that she wouldn't fully get out. But Linda's arm got stuck in her seatbelt during the altercation, and as John is pounding and beating on her, she also got stuck in the wheel well of the car. Now, if you don't know what a wheel well is, it's basically the space in between the tire and the actual car. Like if you look at any average unmodified car, there is a sizable gap between the wheel and the hole that it's in. And if you're from the city, a lot of stray cats and squirrels like to hide in that space, especially during the winter, which is why a lot of people will give their tires a light kick before they start driving just in case. But that's what a wheel well is, and that's where Linda was stuck. But that wasn't enough of an alarm for them to stop because John got in the car where the other three girls were patiently waiting and began driving while Linda was trapped underneath them. As Linda was screaming for her life, along with all the nearby neighbors who witnessed, they dragged and drove her the length of 2 football fields. And it wasn't that they didn't know or they couldn't hear. Dozens of people were screaming and begging for them to stop the car and to let her go.
He was dragging a lady by the seatbelt from outside the car. The door had closed on the seatbelt and she was stuck in it. I got out of my vehicle screaming for them, please stop, you're dragging a lady. Other neighbors were also screaming at them.
He drove off in an attempt to stop them.
But it wasn't until she was dragged for almost 2 blocks that her arm was severed off by a utility pole cable that also ripped off all of her clothes. It was then that they decided to stop the car so that John could open the door to kick Linda's body onto the street so that they can continue driving. Neighbors nearby that had witnessed and heard the screams ran to help Linda, but there was only so much that they could do. One neighbor ran to her home to get a blanket just to cover Linda with so that she could preserve even an ounce of her dignity.
As soon as I saw her, I just screamed and I just started running for her. I thought that if I could somehow, I don't know what I thought I could do, but I thought I could dislodge her from this car. When I looked down, her body was already there and her arm was like, it's just not something that you expect to see.
While that same neighbor's husband stayed with Linda, trying to keep her conscious while they waited for the ambulance so that she wouldn't be alone.
Sit beside a woman who's probably a mother, grandmother, and watch her fade away. I mean, as my wife said, everyone was praying. I wasn't. I was quite angry and telling this woman to hang in there because every time I heard a siren, I was hoping and praying that was an ambulance. I kept saying to this woman, the ambulance is here, just hang in there, because I could see it breathing, the eyes are moving, and I've never seen anything so horrific.
Linda suffered a torn aorta and fractured her collarbones, ribs, and her vertebrae. The paramedics arrived 30 minutes later and pronounced Linda dead. She died naked, without an arm, and in the middle of the street at 73 years old. To make matters even worse, the teenagers had only driven 13 blocks before abandoning the car. They had beaten up and killed Linda for this car to go 13 blocks? There's just like no justification for what they did, but in a sick way, you would almost think that if you're willing to go that far, be this evil for a car, you would actually do something with it. But that shows you that to them, her life was only worth 13 blocks. I just don't even understand. It was disturbing, outrageous, and unsettling to the entire community. And the police knew that they had to do something. They had to find these teenagers. After releasing the surveillance footage of the carjacking, two of the mothers of the teenage girls involved actually had turned them into the police station, identifying their child as one of the perpetrators. And honestly, I have major respect and sympathy for these mothers just because there are so many stories of people protecting and shielding their child from the consequences of their terrible actions. Some parents go as far as destroying evidence, hiding their child, and doing whatever they have to do to make them look innocent. And I know it wasn't easy for them to turn their child in, but they knew it was the right thing to do. We talk more about the parents later on in this case. But after those two girls were identified, a tip actually led them to their third suspect, John. And after three of the suspects were identified, the fourth one just turned themselves in because at that point, you should turn yourself in. I would assume there's no point in hiding if your accomplices have already been found. They were all arrested and they were all being held without bond. The trial for Linda's murder was held on November 27, 2023, and it only lasted about 7 hours. Due to the severity of the crime, all four teenagers were being charged as an adult for second-degree murder and facing life in prison. The three girls, Bryn Raya, Lynn Raya, and Markel, ended up taking a plea deal to avoid life in prison and to testify against John Honore. The three girls apologized and begged for forgiveness from the family in court, and their charges were brought down to attempted manslaughter. Now, manslaughter is the accidental killing of a person without malice or intent, but with some sort of gross negligence or recklessness. Whereas second degree murder is the intentional killing of someone that wasn't premeditated or planned. An example of manslaughter would be if you're driving, minding your business, having a good time, listening to some music, and you get so wrapped up in the song, you're speeding and not paying attention. So you don't see a child jump out into the middle of the street and you hit that child and kill them. That's vehicular manslaughter because you didn't go outside with a plan to kill anyone. You had no ill will towards that child, but you were being reckless and your actions caused the death of another person unintentionally. An example of second degree murder would be if you caught your significant other in bed with someone else and the person gets up, shoves you, so you take out a gun and you shoot them. That might be considered second degree because you had no plans of killing that person today until that situation arose. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and all of this is just loose definitions based off of what I've researched, because a lot of the difference between first, second, and third degree murder and manslaughter is just intention, provocation, and the state of mind during the crime. Now, I said all of this because I think it's important to know how multiple people could be involved in the same exact crime, but be given different punishments. Now, obviously, their charges were reduced because they took a plea deal, which usually involves the defendant getting a better outcome in exchange for giving the prosecutor something that they want. And in this case, they want John Honore. He was deemed the ringleader or the main suspect of this crime and many others. He had a long rap sheet and was not new to committing crime. So I assumed the courts thought it would be better to get him for a longer time and lessen the other three girls' sentences rather than giving all four of them an equal but smaller sentence that maybe John deserved. Which I can't say is right or wrong, but I do feel like through this, the actions and the roles that the other girls played are slightly under acknowledged. Even if you look up this case, the main name in all the headlines and in all the articles is typically just John Honore's along with his picture, which it should be, but I don't think that the girl should be a footnote. It's almost represented as if John did everything while the three other girls just sat in the car, when in the video, you can see at least one of the girls helping John beat up Linda. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sure other people on the case disagree. Like the family, they seem to be more understanding and forgiving towards the girls. Like Linda's sister-in-law, Kathy, said, quote, I think they were really sincere with their apology, and we appreciate that they did admit their guilt and accept their punishment, and hopefully, as time goes on, everyone can heal. And Linda's biological sister, Jenny Lynn, said that she feels sadness for them and they, quote, probably didn't want to do what they did as to go as far as the murder, but they were still trying to steal a car, and that's still a felony, end quote. But the family's tune was understandably very different for John Honore. Kathy said, quote, John Honore deserves no mercy. We want him to get the maximum. He drove the car, he stomped on her. The girls, they were all there for the ride, but the issue we had with them is they didn't do anything to stop it. And Jenny Lynn said, quote, he's a jerk, a little punk, and he deserves to go where he's going. He is a demon, and God saw that demon that day, and that's how Linda's arm got severed. John pled not guilty in court and initially did not apologize to the family, and many say he showed no remorse. He later sent them a handwritten letter apologizing for his actions, saying that the carjacking was the biggest mistake of his life. Now, the overall look of the letter and the writing would suggest that someone much younger wrote it. It has some misspellings, unintelligible words, and grammar issues, so bear with me as I read it to you. Now, if you're watching the YouTube version of the podcast, I'll have the letter up right here so you can read alongside me. It says, to the family of Miss Linda Freaky, I am John and I am so sorry. I apologize for you having to go through what you are going through. No person's family should have to go through that type of hurt. I made the biggest mistake of my life that day. I think about what you and the family may be going through every day. I say the Our Father prayer every day and night. I ask for forgiveness every day. I have wanted to write you all a letter for a long time, but I didn't know what to say, and I still don't know what to say. I just want you to know sincerely I am sorry. And I know words may change how you feel, but I want you to know that I am aware of how serious this is and am trying are I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what that says right there. I think I am doing the right thing. If you read this, thank you and at least accept the letter. J.H. Now, I don't think this letter moved the family very much, but his lawyer tried his very best to play up the stupid kids, they don't know what they're doing angle in court, but the family and the court wasn't buying it.
Pointing out multiple times that Honore was a minor at the time of the crime.
It was more insulting. And, as he's saying, it was stupid kids, a stupid game. It was no type of just idiot kids. They knew what they were doing. And he had several opportunities where he could have stopped. When he pulled her out the car, instead of throwing her at his feet and stomping her, he could have threw her to the side, got in the car, and left. Probably would have got away with it.
His lawyer tried everything, genuinely, bringing up his age, his immaturity, his upbringing, the socio-economical conditions surrounding him, the lack of opportunities he was afforded, and he even brought up his father. His lawyer was pulling at every string that he had to make him look a little innocent. He even showed a picture of John and his dad where his dad is wearing a, quote, pornographic shirt and is flipping off the camera as John flashes gang signs and hand signals and says, quote, if you need to know where this came from, you can look at the sins of a father, end quote. Now, this makes no sense to me because pointing out the fact that he has a bad dad would not exempt him from the consequences of his actions. Literally, hundreds of thousands of people have bad fathers, and they somehow refrain from carjacking, beating up, and killing old ladies. Now, I'm not going to deny that his upbringing and surroundings play a role in his psyche and his behavior, but That's just a reason. It's not an excuse. His lawyer said, quote, "You condemn a sin, not the sinner," which I think is the perfect quote to tell you just how much this lawyer could not help his case. Because that's the entire point of the judicial system. This is not church, the judges are not God, and the point is to punish people for their crimes, not based on how good their soul is. And even if it wasn't, John got off on a lot of his crimes without proper punishment. He had even had 7 arrests starting at the age of 12 years old, including armed robbery, possession of a firearm, auto theft, flight from an officer, and 18 other burglaries. He did all of that within 5 years. He was arrested 5 times while he was supposed to be on house arrest for a home invasion that he did to a family member of his. He was also arrested in 2020 for carjacking, but the charges were dropped because the victim was another family member who didn't want to press charges on him. John had evaded responsibility for his actions for a very long time, so it makes sense that the courts and the family had no sympathy left to give him. Linda's family and friends loved her viciously and held nothing back in court. Kathy said, quote, "When you take your last breath, may the only thing you hear be the hellhounds coming for you to drag your ass back to where you belong. Personally, I hope you don't make it out of prison and that those hellhounds come after you quick." End quote. The family was angry, and rightfully so. And also, I'm really glad that they got to express that anger so clearly in court and in the media. Because so many times when someone is unjustly taken from a family, the media wants the family to be the sad, grieving, God forgiving, selfless type, when most people are just really angry when something like this happens.
I hope that where he's going, he feels every emotion that Linda felt. I hope he feels the fear that she had in her heart that day. I hope he feels the pain. And when he hears his own self screaming for mercy and it don't come.
18 months after Linda's death, John Honore was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years, and the 3 girls were given 20 years and have to serve a minimum of 15. Linda's family celebrated after the sentencing, saying, quote, "We got justice. We felt we did justice for Linda." Her family plans to start a foundation called Linda's Love to raise awareness for crimes against senior citizens, and they want to lobby for harsher sentences for crimes against senior citizens, similar to how in school zones and in construction sites there are harsher penalties. They want the same thing for crimes against the elderly, which I think would be an amazing, fair, and reasonable outcome for this. But a slightly more controversial part of the aftermath of this case is that Linda's husband, Ricky Freaky, actually filed a lawsuit against the parents of the carjackers, but, quote, put it on ice until the trial was over. The lawsuit is seeking $50,000 for wrongful death and loss of income, along with emotional suffering. It's been controversial, and many people have different opinions online because he's suing the parents of the teenagers, which is a fairly new concept since some parents of school shooters have recently been convicted in their role in their child's crime. Ricky's lawyer says, quote, "In this instance, it's about proving that the parents will be held responsible and liable for acts such as these," end quote. Which I understand, but I think with a case like this, negligence could have played more of a role. But how would you know that your child is going to carjack and killed someone's loved one? Something like that seems like the parents would have far less involvement than parents of school shooters who gift their visibly disturbed children guns. But they're trying to expand the lawsuit to the city of New Orleans, the Office of Juvenile Justice, and the state of Louisiana. And I hope they do get some sort of financial compensation because technically all they did was lose. They lost Linda and they'll never be able to get her back. And they lost thousands of dollars in lawyers, court, and in legal fees. It's just a sad case overall, but I'm glad that Linda got justice. This case was sad and heartbreaking, just like every other case that I cover. But I'm really glad that I got to share Linda's story with you because it wasn't right and it wasn't fair. If you have any other suggestions for cases you'd like me to cover, please don't hesitate to reach out on the Instagram, She Talks Crime, and give us a rating on Apple or Spotify podcasts. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!
Hello?